There was a time when he had nothing. No job. No goal. No hope that tomorrow would look any different from today. He owned 2 shirts and a mattress on the floor, and most mornings he didn't even bother getting up, because what was the point of waking up for a life that was going nowhere? This is not a story about luck. Nobody handed him anything. What changed wasn't his circumstances, it was one decision, made on an ordinary day, to try just one more time. He failed. Then he failed again. But somewhere in all that failing, he learned the one thing that changed everything. You don't have to succeed to keep going. You just have to refuse to let failing be the reason you stop. This is his story. The alarm went off at 9, and Daniel let it ring until it stopped on its own. There was nothing to wake up for. No job waiting, no one expecting a call, no plan sitting on the table like it used to when he was younger and believed mornings meant something. He lived in a single room above a shuttered print shop, paid for by whatever odd work came his way, carrying boxes, sweeping floors, standing in for people who didn't want to stand in the rain. He owned a mattress, 2 shirts, a phone with a cracked screen, and a silence that had settled into him so completely he'd stopped noticing it was there. He hadn't always been like this. There had been a version of him, years back, who wanted things. Who talked about opening a repair shop, who sketched logos on napkins, who believed effort turned into something eventually. That version had tried. And failed. And tried again. And failed harder. Somewhere along the way, trying had started to feel like a joke the world was playing on him, and he'd simply stopped laughing along. His mother called it a phase for the first year. Stopped calling after the 3rd. That morning, the one that would later feel like a hinge, though it didn't feel like anything at the time, Daniel walked to the corner store for bread he couldn't really afford. An old man was on the ground outside, having slipped on the wet step, groceries scattered around him like he'd dropped an entire life. Daniel almost walked past. That was the honest truth of it. His first instinct was to keep his head down and go. That was what he did now. He didn't get involved. Involvement required believing it mattered. But the old man made a small sound, more embarrassment than pain, and something in Daniel, some leftover reflex from the person he used to be, bent down anyway. You all right? Foolish old legs, the man muttered, gripping Daniel's forearm as he pulled himself up. Foolish wet step. Daniel gathered the cans that had rolled into the gutter, walked the man to his door 2 blocks up, made sure he had someone to check on him. The whole thing took 11 minutes. It was nothing. It shouldn't have meant anything. But walking back, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He had done something, and it had gone fine. That night he lay on the mattress turning it over. Not the old man, the feeling. The strange, small pulse of I did a thing and it worked out. He'd forgotten that feeling existed. He'd built his whole life around avoiding the version of it that came from trying and losing, and in doing that, he'd also cut himself off from the version that came from trying and, occasionally, not losing. He didn't decide to change his life that night. That's not how it happened, and if you'd asked him afterward he would tell you honestly that no single decision saved him. What happened instead was smaller and stranger. He decided to try one thing. Just once. Expecting nothing. He remembered the boxes he used to carry for a moving company, how he'd noticed the way people's furniture always seemed to arrive scratched, and how nobody in the business seemed to care. He had, once, wanted to fix that. So, expecting to fail, genuinely expecting it, he bought a roll of moving blankets with money he didn't really have and started offering careful moves to anyone who'd take a chance on him. His first month, he got 2 clients. One cancelled last minute. The other paid him $30 and complained the whole time. He kept going. His second month, he dropped a dresser down half a flight of stairs and had to pay for the damage out of pocket, which put him further behind than when he'd started. He sat on the curb afterward, certain this was proof of everything he'd already believed about himself, that trying only led back to the same place, just more tired. But he thought of the old man. 11 minutes, and it had gone fine. Maybe this wouldn't. But maybe the next thing would. He kept going, because he had promised himself only one thing, not that he'd succeed, but that he wouldn't let failing be the reason he stopped. Month 4, someone told a friend. Month 7, he bought an actual dolly instead of borrowing one. Month 11, he made rent without borrowing from anyone for the first time in 3 years, and he sat in his room and cried for reasons he didn't fully understand. None of it was fast. None of it was clean. There were months he broke even and months he went backward. A client accused him of a scratch he hadn't made, and he paid for it anyway rather than argue, because he didn't yet trust himself enough to believe he was right. A partnership with another mover fell apart over money within 4 months. He was, by any reasonable measure, still mostly failing. But he was failing forward, and there is a difference between that and the stillness he'd lived in before, even if from the outside they might look similar for a while. 2 years in, he had 3 employees, a small truck with his name on the side, Whitfield Careful Movers, and, more than the money, he had the particular calm of a man who had built something out of literally nothing but his own decision to keep standing back up. He didn't forget where he'd started. That was the part that mattered most, in the end, not the truck, not the money, but the memory of the mattress and the 2 shirts and the alarm he used to let ring itself out. So when a 19-year-old kid he'd hired, sullen, late every other day, clearly carrying something heavy that had nothing to do with boxes, started talking one afternoon about how none of it mattered, how trying was for people who had a head start he didn't have, Daniel didn't lecture him. He just told him the truth. "I used to own 2 shirts," he said. "I mean that literally. 2. I let my phone alarm ring itself out most mornings because there wasn't a single reason to get up that I believed in." He loaded a box into the truck. "I'm not telling you it gets easy. I dropped a dresser down a flight of stairs and it cost me everything I'd made that month. I got cheated. I failed a partnership. I'm still not where I want to be." He looked at the kid. "But I started exactly where you're standing. Not somewhere better. Here. And the only thing that changed anything was that I didn't let failing be the reason I stopped trying." The kid didn't say much. Kids like that rarely do, not right away. But he showed up on time the next day. And the one after. Daniel began saying it more, to whoever would listen, at the community center on Thursdays, to guys he met who reminded him of who he used to be, to anyone standing at the edge of their own life the way he once had, certain there was nothing left to reach for. "You don't need a better starting point," he told them. "You need to stand up from the one you've got." He never claimed the falling would stop. Only that it didn't have to be the end of the story, only ever a part of it, if you were willing to keep standing back up in the same spot you fell. Daniel didn't start with talent, or money, or a plan that worked. He started with a mattress, 2 shirts, and a morning he almost let pass like every other. What changed his life wasn't one big moment, it was 1,000 small refusals to quit, stacked one on top of the other, until one day he looked up and realized he'd built something out of nothing. Maybe you're standing exactly where he once stood. Maybe nothing about your life feels like it's moving. If that's you, this is the only thing worth remembering. You don't need a better starting point. You need to stand up from the one you've got. Try. Fail. Try again. That's the whole secret. There isn't another one.